All right, welcome back, the Genius. So today is our day 17. So let's take a look at scope, hoisting, and closures. Okay, so you'll be reading scopes and closure chapter 1 to 3 of the You Don't Know JavaScript. All right, you would also be reading the Eloquent JavaScript chapter 3. Okay, so you'll be creating, your practice will be to create a function with inner functions and closures. Okay, all right. What is scope? When we talk about scope, we are talking about um, at what boundary or at what area can we access a variable, whether it's a function, whether it's a variable, at what point can we access a variable? So scope in JavaScript defines where variables, functions, and objects are accessible in your code during execution. So scope defines a boundary where you can access a variable, access a function, or access an object that you have created in your or declared in your program. So think of scope as the rules about where you can see and use a variable. You cannot create a variable in another scope and access it in another scope. No. All right. Now look at it. Abuja is a scope. Lagos State is a scope. Port Harcourt is a scope. So anything that is that is within Port Harcourt cannot be seen outside Port Harcourt. You understand? Anything that is within Lagos cannot be seen outside Lagos. Do you understand? Anything that is seen within Nigeria cannot be seen outside Nigeria. So that's the scope. Nigeria as a country is the scope. All right. All the things within Nigeria can be accessed within Nigeria, not outside of Nigeria. Okay. So why scope exists? So scope is important because it prevents variable name conflicts. So let me take you to, let's open this. Let me open Visual Studio Code. All right. So let me show you an example of scope. Let me show you an example of scope. So let's say I have a variable. Let A equal to 90. So this is a global scope because on any program, this A can be accessible inside of this file. It can be accessible inside of this file. But when I now come and say, I'm creating a function, and I'll call it func, all right? In this case, let A equal to 78 is different. You see, this A that we are seeing here can only be used within this scope. So this is called a function scope. While everything, the whole program, the whole file is called a global scope. I will come to explain that. So you cannot access, okay, let me change this thing to B. All right. I cannot come and access, if I say console.log, I cannot come and access B. If I try it, it will give us a reference error. Because this B was declared inside of this scope. So let's assume that this is Lagos City. This scope is Lagos City. And this B was declared inside of Lagos City. And I'm trying to access B in scope of Nigeria. No, it can't work. If I try to do this now, node index. If I try to do this now, it will give us reference error. It says that B is not defined. So I can only say, I can only use B inside of the scope that it was created in. So if I run this now, there will be no error. All right? There will be no error. Of course, I did not call this function. That's why. That's why nothing was printed. I have to call this function. So you can see now that there is no error because I'm accessing this B inside of the scope it was created in. So I can access A from anywhere because A is a global, scope, is in a global scope. So if I run this now, I will get A printed 90. All right. So this is scope. All right. This is function scope. All right. Why the whole file This whole file is the global scope. So it prevents variable name conflicts. So I can come back and say, I also want to name this guy A. All right, I want to name this guy A. So I can also use this A here. So there will be no name collision conflict here. This A that I'm accessing here is the one that is in the global scope. This A that I'm accessing here is the one that is in this function scope. So if I run this code now, I will still get 90. But if I call the function, all right, if I call the function, if I say func and I call the function, this A will be printed. Okay, let me just do something. I will say A from func. A from func. Okay. Then I will do this. Okay. So this one will be from the global, while this one is from the func. So if I run this now, you're going to see that there is no name conflict. This one is from the function scope, while this other one, the 90, is from the global scope. So it controls variable lifetime. All right, let me explain this. The thing is this, as soon as this function call exits, this variable will be destroyed. It will be removed from the program, removed from memory. Do you understand? So the lifetime of this variable A here ends after this function call ends. After calling this function, all right, this variable A will be destroyed or removed from the memory. But this one exists as long as this program exists. But this other one would only exist in the lifetime of this function. So as soon as this function call was finished, A will no longer be available. So that is the lifetime. So the scope determines the lifetime of a variable. It allows code isolation for security and maintainability. And let's take a look at types of scope. The first one we'll take a look at is the global scope. Variables declared outside of any function or block have global scope. You can see that this guy now is declared outside of any block or any function. So it is a global scope. All right. So it can be accessible anywhere in the code, but you have to be careful. Global variables can be overwritten from anywhere, leading to bugs. Please avoid global scopes. You see this thing? This thing I did here is very wrong. Make sure, no, don't do this. Okay? Don't have global scopes. Although, try to avoid it as much as possible. Try to avoid it as much as possible. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them, but try to avoid them as much as possible. All right? So, in this example now, you can see this name is a global scope. All right? And this, it cannot be, we can also access it inside of the function, because the function scope can also access anything outside of it. So look at what I'm saying here. I have A here. So even if I don't have this A, look at, if I remove this now, okay, I am having access to, because this function scope is inside of the global scope, function scopes can also access global scopes. So if I run this code now, I'm going to be printing A. And now you see A now is 90 because I am accessing the global the global scope A. So it can cause confusion. All right. So please make sure that you're very careful with global scopes. All right. Global scope is general. Global scope is like Nigeria. Why function scope and the other scope that we'll be talking about is like a state, a city in a state, something like that. Okay. So function scope, when the variables declared inside a function are accessible only within that function. They are accessible only within that function. So when you declare using var, let, or const keyword inside of a function, you will get function scope variables. All right. So in this case now, please avoid using var keyword to declare variables. So in this case now, x is a function scope variable. it can only be accessed inside of this function. You can't have access to it outside of it. Okay? All right. So if you try to access it outside of the function, you will get a reference error. You have seen me demonstrate that already. Block scopes, variable declared with let and const inside of a block can be accessed only inside of that block. So we also have what we call block scope. Okay. So if statement, for loop, they create block scopes. Okay. So if I say instead of this function now, if I say if true, all right, and I now say let A equal to B, let A equal to 7, you can see that this A here has a block scope. The variable A here has a block scope. This is a block scope. Why this is a function scope? So functions create function scope. Why if statement, for statement, as in the for loop, the while loop, all right, they switch, they create block statements. They create block scopes. So another way of creating a scope, a block scope is also, I can also do something like this. So this is also valid. I can say let A equal to 87. They are all different. This A here is different from this A here. So I can also create a block scope like this. Okay, but this could be advanced. All right, so anything I do inside here will be executed. So I can say console from block, all right. I can also say look at what I'm doing here. I can say console from if block. So you can see that because they have different scopes, there will be no issue. All right. Why this one will be right? Okay, I can say this one is from global. A from global. Okay, maybe I can now add. I can now create let A equal to 43. So this one is from the function scope. All right. This one is from the block scope. This one is from the if block scope. And this one is the global scope. So let's run our code and see what we get. I will first of all clear. Okay, so the thing is this. We have A from func 90. All right. So this one didn't run. All right. And like I said, this could be advanced. This one didn't run. Okay. And then if true, this should also run now. Why didn't it run? Yes, this should run because true is, this should also this should also run. What happened? Okay, so now the thing is that I'm going to put this thing inside of an expression so that JavaScript will see it as an expression and run it for me. I might be causing okay. So what's happening? What's happening? So okay, so why am I having this is an expression? Okay. Okay, so see what I'm going to do to see demonstrate what I'm doing. All right, so now this cannot work anymore. So, but the thing is that I wouldn't want to go into details of using the block to create a block. Of course, it's not even practical. So, but of course, you can see that when I did that block, I was not having this error. So I can take these things out so that it wouldn't cause more errors. So if I save and run this code, you see, we get A from func, all right, and we got A from the if block, and we got A from the global scope. All right. So var is not block scoped. Of course, don't even use var. I don't know, but we just keep bringing this into your notice. Just forget about using var. I think I will stop talking about var keyword anymore. So we are with this if statement now, we are creating a block scope. All right. then we cannot access A outside of this block scope. We can't. We cannot. So it will throw a reference error. All right. So we cannot access them. But C, you can see that because C was created inside here, it's a global, it's a function scope. Please just forget about anything that has to do with var. Okay, forget about it. We also have the lexical scope. All right. Inner functions can access variables from their own scope and all parent scope. So if I have a function instead of another function, that function can have access to the parent scope. So let me explain to you. I have a function here. I can also create another function. I can say function. I can call this inner. All right. So this inner function has a scope, and then it can also have access to the parent scope. So I can do something like this, even without, let me do this. Look at it. There will be no error. You can see there is no error. So I can say A from inner. All right. So there is no error here. So a function can be nested instead of another function. And I can go on and say, and I can call inner right away. All right. So this could be from inner. So if I call now, this function would run. When we call this function, it would come down here and also call this function. So if I go on and do this, we will have something like this. So you can see now that the inner function did not create its own a variable, but it was able to access the parent function. So this func now is the parent function of this inner function. Do you understand? So that is why we got the same value from the inner and the func function. Okay. So we call this the lexical scope. When a function is netted inside another function, it will have access to its parent function. And this is the basics for closures. So we'll be explaining closure in a minute, okay? So outer function can have inner function, all right? Outer function can have inner function, and inner function can have access to all the variables out inside of its parent function. So you can also, we have scope chain. Now, when you try to access a variable, JavaScript will search for the current scope. If JavaScript does not see the variable in the current scope, it will go down to the parent scope. If it does not see it in the parent scope, it will go to the global scope and search for it. And if it does not see it in the global scope, that means there is a reference error. So first of all, JavaScript will start from the current scope. If it does not see that thing the variable you're trying to access, if it cannot access it in the current scope, it will go to the parent scope, look for it in the parent scope. If it does not see it, it will now go to the global scope. And if it does not see it there, it will throw an error, reference error. So when you use var let const keyword to create, the scope that var creates is function scoped. Let is block scoped. Constant is also block scoped. But of course, forget anything about var. All right? Forget anything about var. Okay? So variables cannot be reassigned when you use constant. They can be reassigned when you use let. Hoisting, yes, they can hoist, but there's something to it. We'll talk about that later. Okay? So there's something we call execution context. There are two phases in the, I don't know if I'm going to make sense with this now, but during the execution, we have something we call execution context. So we have the creation phase. So once we get to the creation phase, variables will be created and they will be hoisted. Then scope of that variable, when variables will be created and hoisted, then the scope of that variable will be hoisted. Now, execution phase, the code runs, variable values will be assigned. So variable values are not assigned until the code runs. The variable can be created in the creation phase, but they will not be assigned to any value, even if you assign the value. That is not where the assignment of the value occurs. This is somehow advanced, okay? But try to understand as much as you can understand. So variables are hoisted during creation phase, and the scope will be created. When the code runs, that is when the variable value will be assigned. So real-life uses of scope. Avoid name collisions in big projects. Keep data private using function scopes. Okay. create closures for state management. All right, so we'll talk about closures, okay? Now, what's the takeaway? Global scope available everywhere. Avoid global scope as much as you can. Function scope inside of a function only. Variables will be accessible inside of a function only. Block scope only within the block. So if you create any variable with let or constant, they will be within that block of code, okay? Lexical scope, inner functions access outer variables in their parent scope. Always prefer let and const keyword over var. All right. So what is hoisting? I have explained hoisting a bit in the previous class. So hoisting in JavaScript behavior of Hoisting is JavaScript behavior of moving declarations to the top of their scope during the creation phase of execution. Remember, the execution context has two phases, creation phase and execution phase. So during the creation phase of the execution, JavaScript would create all the variables that have been created, then they will hoist it. JavaScript will hoist it. That means JavaScript will take it to the top of their scope. JavaScript will take it to the top of their scope before any code actually runs. So this means you can use variables and functions before they are declared, but with important rules depending on the type of declaration. My advice is, if you don't understand this hoisting, please do not use variables before declaring them. Make sure you declare them before you use them. That should be my advice for now. Only declarations are hoisted, not assignments. So when you declare a variable, it is only the declaration that is hoisted. The assignments are not hoisted. That means if you declare a variable, the value of that variable will be undefined. All right? Because the assignments are not hoisted. So avoid hoisting in general. When does hoisting happen? Hoisting happens before code execution. So in the creation phase. So when the variables are created, the scope will also be created. So the variable declaration will be hoisted. Okay? JavaScript engine scans your code, register variable and function declarations, and set up memory for them. So during the creation phase, JavaScript will look at all the variables that you've created and the function that you've declared. Then it will create a memory for them, but it will not assign any value to them. Okay? So when you use var keyword to declare variable, they will be hoisted and initialized with undefined. So they will not be assigned to anything. Remember, assignment does not happen during hoisting. Assignment of values to the variables does not happen during hoisting. So when you use var keyword to create, yes, they will be hoisted. That means you can use them before you declare them, but the value will be undefined. This is why accessing them before declaration doesn't throw an error, but it returns undefined. It will be hoisted, all right, and it will be given a value of undefined, so there will be no error. But when you use the let keyword, it will not allow you. So when you say var a, declaration will be hoisted. That means JavaScript will take the whole declaration to the top of the scope, all right, and then create memory location for it, then assign a value of undefined to it. So even if you say var a equals to 90, during hoisting, it will still be undefined. All right? So this is when assignment occurs when the code runs. That is when assignment occurs. So if you don't understand this hoisting thing, please don't use variables before you declare them. Declare variables first before you use them. So with the let and constant keyword, const keyword, they are hoisted but not initialized immediately. So they will still be hoisted to the topmost scope, but they will not be initialized to undefined. They will not be initialized to anything. So they exist in something we call temporal dead zone from the start of the scope until the declaration line is executed. Accessing them before declaration results in reference error. So this would even help you so that you will stay away from errors. So in this case now, we are using variable b before the declaration and assignment. So it will not work. It will be hoisted, the declaration will be hoisted, but it will not be assigned to anything. Do you understand? So, and it will not even be available. It will be available in the temporal dead zone. It will not be available for the program. So when you try to access it, it will throw you reference error. It will say, I did not see it. So why? Declaration is hoisted, but JavaScript prevents access until the actual line is reached. So that line where you now assign value to it, that is where everything starts. Just run away from using variables before you declare them. Function declarations can be hoisted. All right, both name and body can be hoisted. So you can call them before they are defined. So there will be no error. You can call this function even before you define it. JavaScript will hoist it for you. So function expressions are not hoisted. They behave like variables. If you declare them with var, they are hoisted as undefined. Calling them before declaration causes type error. So function expressions will be hoisted, but the name will be hoisted, but the body will not be hoisted. Just run away from hoisting. Always declare variables or function before you use them. If declare will let constant keyword, they are hoisted but in the temporal dead zone. Calling them before causes reference error. So stop, don't use variables before you access them. Before you declare them, sorry. Don't use variables before you declare them. So this will throw an error. So temporal dead zone is the period between entering a scope and the point where a variable, where a let or const variable is declared. So I don't even know how to explain this temporal dead zone, okay? But just understand that. Stay away from hoisting. Always declare your variables with let or constant keyword. Always declare your variables before you use them. As simple as that. Okay? It exists to prevent accidental use of variables. So this is JavaScript mechanism to prevent errors. All right? So don't just run away from hoisting. So let's talk about closure. I'll try to explain as much as I can. Closure is created when a function remembers and can access variables from its outer scope, even after that outer function has finished executing. So remember that we said that a function that is inside of another function can have access to the scope of its parent. So that is exactly what we mean by closure. So in simple terms, a closure is like a backpack a function carries. Inside the backpack are the variables that were in scope when the function was created. So in this case, you have closure with your parent. Your parent properties are your properties, right? So even when our parents are no longer available, we still carry their name. We still represent them. So when a function has another function inside of it, that function that is inside of it will still remember the execution environment, like the variables inside of its parent scope. So how does it work? Closure work because of lexical scope. Functions are executed using the scope in which they are created, not the scope from which they are called. Okay, so JavaScript stores a reference to the outer scope variables instead of, let me stop speaking all this grammar that I'm speaking here. Okay, let's go and show you an example. Let's go and show you an example. Okay, I'm speaking too much grammar here. So guys, I will delete everything here. So I'm going to create a function. I will call this function add. Okay. And then I will create another function that's going to be an inner function. I will call it how do I explain? I want to give a very good name here. Okay, I can say add any number. Add any number. Then this one, I can now call this one add. Okay. All right. So in this case, I'm going to return, I will return add as a function. I will return add. So in here, I will say, this is the number to add. I'll call it num. All right. Then I will call this one I'll call this one Let me just call it anything. Let me just call it A. All right. So in this case, I will now say, I will say return num plus A. I could just use the return keyword here. Okay. So now, look at what we are doing here. When we give a function a parameter, this will be available in the scope. All right. Okay, let me just say, okay, let's say add 5. Let me just say add 5. Let me call this function add 5. Okay. And then I will say, I will say let num equal to 5. No, this will not work. Let me go back to num. I will call this thing add num. Add number. Okay. Then I would want users to actually, so what I'm having here is this. So I am saying if this function is going to have access to this variable, to this parameter, because this parameter will be a variable that's available within the scope of the add number function. So since this one is a child, since the add function is a child of this one, it will have access to any variable inside of it. So if I go on and say const, I'll call this thing add, and I will say is equal to add number, and then I'm adding 5. See what is going to happen. If I come now and say console.log, I believe Clojure is somehow advanced, so but you guys should bear. So if I say add 7, okay, I say add 7, add 8, add 9, then add 10. You can see that we are using, if I run this code now, let me make sure that the code is even working. All right, you can see now, look at what we are doing here. When we called the add number function, this function was called. All right, this function body was called. Then this 5 became num, because that's what we passed 5 to 8, so this num became 5. So now we now say we are returning a function called add, and this function add will have access to this num. That means when we call this function, it will return a function for us. And that function is what we are now calling here. And now we are calling this function with different numbers. And you can see that it is remembering the num. It is remembering this num. It is remembering it because this is the scope. I don't know how to explain this, but guys, Clojure is just high level, and I don't know if at your level you would understand what I'm explaining here. But oh my God. Okay. I will skip this. All right. If you want me to talk about this, please drop it in the WhatsApp group that you want me to teach Clojure. So I will just have enough time and to be a live class, and I will teach you and make sure that you're understanding what I'm teaching. So now Clojure is just amazing. So, but it's advanced. All right. But if you want to learn, all right, if you want to learn, let me know so that we can do a live class. Let me leave this Clojure thing. All right. It took me a long time to understand this Clojure. Okay, it took me a long time, but I wouldn't want to put you in such state now. But if you want to learn Clojure, you will not be using Clojure for now. I don't think so. But if you want to learn Clojure, drop it in the comment in the WhatsApp group that you want us to do a live class on Clojure. Then I will teach you Clojure. Okay. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in the next class.